Ladies and gentlemen, this is Robert Moses. Robert Moses was chief of planning of New York City from the 1930s until the 1960s. For 4 decades, he was the most powerful man in New York, even though he was never elected into a public office. Here we see how Robert Moses governed the city. He looked at it from above. And on the basis of his expertise, he decided what would be the most efficient and most effective city, and then he put it into practice. And he enforced it on the city and its people. Robert Moses, by now, has been thoroughly discredited. If you take planning education or if you study governance at all, Robert Moses is held up as somebody who did it all wrong. So today we don't want order to be imposed from above by an expert. We want order to emerge from below, organically. Perhaps the most inspiring example of order emerging from below is Wikipedia, the encyclopedia. Thousands of volunteers each work on their own initiative on the topics of their own choosing. They are not governed by anybody in particular. There's no central oversight. And nevertheless, Wikipedia is the most comprehensive repository of human knowledge ever. Also, when we look at cities, we see inspiring examples of self-organization, of order emerging from below. Let me mention just one example from the city of Rotterdam, the Reading Salon in the neighborhood Oude Weste. When the community library in Oude Weste had to close, residents wanted to create an alternative. So they opened up a place where people could bring and take out books. It was an immediate success. Now there are dozens of volunteers who manage the place. And it's much more than a place to engage with books. People can perform music, poetry. You can cook meals there, eat meals there, take language courses, and so on. So these examples seem to suggest that order can emerge from below, that provisions can be created by amateurs, and that these provisions are better than those provided for by the state. So this is very inspiring, but I would say there's also a danger to it. Let me first say what's inspiring about it. And I want to capture that with this image of Wikitopia. So Wikitopia would be a city or a society that is governed like Wikipedia is, where nobody is forced to do anything in particular, where everybody decides what needs to be done and then goes about doing it. Solidarity, in that case, is not enforced by a state, but it is created by communities themselves. This is a beautiful idea, and I know that many people in this audience also believe in this idea. So that is why I wanted to also highlight some problematic aspects of this idea and of self-organization. So self-organization can be very inspiring, but there are also downsides. And I think we need to acknowledge those downsides if we're going to work with self-organization. So the first downside of self-organization is that it is a very uneven process. Hundreds of people have found their way to the Reading Salon in Oude Weste to see how self-organization works. But those people should also visit the 13 other neighborhoods where community libraries had to close down and where no Reading Salon was established. Self-organization sometimes succeeds and very often fails. A second downside of self-organization is that it breeds bureaucracy. We have grown accustomed to think about bureaucracy as something that is imposed from above by people like Robert Moses. In fact, when you look at self-organization in practice, you see that the first thing that people do who come together is establish rules, procedures, and so on. This is very apparent also on Wikipedia. There's no central oversight, but rules procedures and protocols have proliferated. Now there's even a function called bureaucrat on Wikipedia. So a third downside of self-organization is that it is often predicated on exclusion. Exactly because self-organization provides tangible benefits for participants, those participants have every incentive to exclude others. So Nobel laureate Elinor Ostrom did research in what she called common resource pool management. That's a complicated word for roughly the same thing as self-organization. And that research is often cited to show that there's a logic beyond the state and the market. But her research actually shows that common resource pool management works best when people are excluded from it, when people can keep the fruits of their own labor. So, why do I want to emphasize these downsides? I know it is maybe not a very TED thing to do. Well, one reason is that I think there needs to be some balance into the debate, for instance, about the participation society. But I also think that there are practical implications. Let me mention the practical implications for sponsors of civic initiatives, because I know that there are many of them in this room. Sponsors of civic initiatives now often go into civil society with the idea to select the best and the brightest civic initiatives, and then shower these initiatives with attention and subsidies. This strategy is very understandable in my view, but it is also very problematic. Because when sponsors do that, they reinforce the negative tendencies of self-organization. They reinforce the unevenness by rewarding the people who already do well. They reinforce bureaucracy by incorporating successful civic initiatives into governance structures. And they reinforce exclusion by creating an alliance of civic elites and governmental elites that is at some distance from constituents and target groups. So might there be a different way to think about the relationship between sponsors and civic initiatives? Could there be a more productive relation? I think there can be. I want to return to the example of the Reading Salon. The Reading Salon was established by two very committed, very competent individuals. And these individuals are often celebrated. But when you ask these people, Joke van der Zwaard and Maurice Specht, why their initiative worked, they say that it worked because they could call upon networks that were already present in their neighborhood. For decades, the government had invested in community facilities, community workers who supported all different kinds of community initiatives, from neighborhood newspapers to Turkish resident associations. And when they founded the Reading Salon, they could call upon all these networks to recruit volunteers to get books together. So it was the networks, not so much the individuals, who made it happen. So what can we learn from this? I would say that you can think, if you're a sponsor, you might want to reap the fruits of civil society, but you can also invest by creating a more fertile soil so that all sorts of different initiatives can flourish. Now, if botanical metaphors are not for you, then also consider the example of Wikipedia. Yes, Wikipedia is self-organized. Thousands of volunteers do what they want to do without any central oversight. But Wikipedia is also facilitated by Wikimedia, an organization that provides servers, fights legal battles, and develops software. So then, if we think about supporting in this way, then we don't think of sponsors as selection committees who need to select the best and the brightest. Then they can think about being a server for whatever initiatives come about in the environment they create. So if people would find a way to work with these recommendations, what would happen? I think self-organization would diversify and democratize as more people and different people can engage in initiatives. I don't think that this necessarily means that all initiatives will succeed. Self-organization is inherently uneven. So many initiatives will still fail. But self-organization is a too inspiring ideal to abandon. So I invite you to think about how we can harness the power of self-organization. Thank you.